We can discuss this in good detail about clauses. And before I get into the nitty gritties of clauses, let me tell you again that the smallest unit of if I have to draw the pyramid, I would say this is the base, this is the lowest level. So we have basically the alphabets A, and then we have B, and till the end we go on, and then we have Z in the end. So these are basically the letters in the English language. We call as the alphabet, 26 letters, right? So these 26 letters are there, and these come together to form words, right? So basically, then we have the words. So these words basically come in some, so we have so many words in the English language, right? And then these words have basically, when they come in a sentence, they have a function, right? So these words basically have a part of speech. Part of speech is basically applicable only to words. So a word could be a noun, right? A word from here could be a noun. A word from here could be a verb. A word from here could be an adjective, right? And a word from here could be a conjunction. It could be anything. So basically, how many parts of speech do we have? Primarily we have 8, right? We have noun, verb, adjective, conjunction, preposition, and then we have the interjection, right? The pronoun, like we have 8. So these are the 8 part of speech, and the 8 part of speech basically categorize the words, and the words are formed by the letters of the English language, right? So you don't have any kind of random combination. You have a meaningful word, and that meaningful word, depending upon its function in a sentence, belongs to a particular part of speech, right? So at times one word could act like a noun in a sentence. The same word could be an adjective in some other sentence. The same word might become a verb in some other sentence, right? And when you have a collection of words, what do you have basically is a phrase, right? So we have PHRASE, phrases. And there are different categories of phrase. We have seen something called as noun phrase, and then we have something called as gerund phrase, and then we have verb phrase, then we have prepositional phrase, then we have infinitive phrase, right? Depending upon what exactly. So basically, phrase is a collection. It's a collection of words, and depending on what function that collection has in the sentence, we give the name of to that phrase a particular name, and that name is basically a noun phrase. So we have around 10 to 12 different kinds of phrases, not more than that. And then after that, we have the clause, right? And this is precisely what we are going to discuss now in the subsequent videos. Clause, right? Now, difference between the clause is that a clause has a verb, the phrase does not have a verb, and therefore the clauses can be further categorized into, and then we have the independent clause, right? Independent basically means they are completely meaningful. You have the independent clause, and then you have the dependent clause, right? So I will just write it here. You have the independent clause, correct? I'm just stretching it here. And then you have the dependent clause. Now the independent clause is basically the meaningful sentence, right? In fact, it's a meaningful idea. The independent clause always gives you the meaningful idea. The dependent clause does not. The dependent clause depends on the independent clause to make itself meaningful, right? So the meaning that you get in a sentence only is possible if you have an independent clause. It is the independent clause that gives you a meaning to a sentence, right? And that independent clause has a subject and a verb. Please understand this. The subject and the verb is always there in the independent clause. Also in the dependent clause, you have subject and verb. But this is completely meaningful. This is not meaningful. It depends on something. We will see examples of that. The phrases, they don't have a finite verb. The parts of speech, we know that, right? So basically, and then the independent clause, the dependent clause is further categorized. We will see the category here. It is given here. And the independent clause, if you might ask, is also further subdivided into different kinds of sentences. We have interrogative sentence, right? We have assertive sentence. We have exclamatory sentence. They are all nothing but independent clauses. So basically, when you say what is your name, it's a complete meaningful idea. It's an independent clause, but Here, basically, we have an so we'll get into the dependent clause now, and the independent clause is a complete meaningful idea. Let's not discuss that because we know what is a meaningful idea. He is a doctor. Now, he is a doctor is a meaningful idea. It's a independent clause with the subject he and the verb is. And then you have something more. So you have the subject complement, you have the object of the verb, whatever it might come. Don't worry about that. But we must know that the independent clause is the strongest and the most, you can say, the strongest and the meaningful unit of a sentence, right? The independent clause. Then comes the dependent clause. So it says here, a phrase is a collection of two or more words, a collection that does not have a subject verb pair in it. We have discussed this again and again. Let's not discuss this now. But if a collection of two or more words has a finite verb, then that finite word must have a subject also. As a result, we have a clause, right? A clause has a subject and a verb. The verb is finite, and this finite verb will always have a subject, and these two must go together to form a clause. Though a clause must have a subject and a finite verb, the subject and the finite verb in itself may not express a meaningful idea, right? The subject and the verb may not express a meaningful idea. A clause that expresses a meaningful idea is called an independent or main clause. While a clause that does not express a complete or meaningful idea is called a dependent or subordinate clause. A subordinate clause depends on the main or the independent clause in order to make complete sense, right? And there are three types of dependent clause. The first is noun clause, the second is adjective clause, the third is adverb clause. From aptitude perspective, these are not important, but we'll just discuss that so that we have a better clarity of the different parts of a sentence. We will discuss each of these in detail.